now that you started a conversation mentioning swimming pools,
Yeah.
just maybe change my entire plan of questions.
All right. Okay.
And just asked the importance of exercise in any way in your writing process. You've mentioned that you swim in the hotel or here in Shanghai.
Yeah.
How does that affect your writing process at all?
And when I'm in the water, my mind seems to be very active.
Yeah.
So when I exercise regularly, when I'm swimming, I often think about a sentence or I thought about something I missed. And I don't know, somehow just, and also the house I'm living now don't have a bath, but before I would have sit in the bath and often lots of ideas and opening the sentence and come to me.
do you normally do this after or before you write?
I cannot just sit down and write. If writing an article or a new paragraph, I often have to think about the beginning first before I sit down, lying there, or sitting there, having a shower, in the swimming pool in the bath, thinking about the opening paragraph, opening sentence. Then I can.
It's interesting because many writing advices, they say just wake up every morning, sit down, and just face that blank page. But your process is more actually letting your mind free for a while until those first nuggets of ideas come through.
I think it works for, it's really different for the way it works, probably just different with different people.
Yeah, what do you find that tends to work more for you as a writing process? And how has your writing process evolved over the years from when you started out teaching yourself English in the factories until today where you're published and writing articles constantly?
No trick for me. It was just writing, just no shortcut. Just have to keep writing.
Keep writing.
Yeah, just keep writing, rewriting.
And when did this fire begin in you?
I guess writing has always been my way of make sense of my life. I started to keep a journal, something I still do today. And also, while I worked for 10 years at a factory, I was taken out of school when I was 16. So I worked at a factory, and that was not the most fragrant part of my life. When I was quite lonely and had quite a lot of time in my hand. So I wrote, and I also found writing extremely therapeutic.
Therapeutic.
Yeah.
And it says in your New York Times, the review of your memoir, that you were so motivated, dedicated, that a four-horse cart couldn't even bring you, because you had a conservative mother and you were taken out of school and put in a factory. And it made me think, I read this little snippet of a Steinbeck journal where he said, when he was writing East of Eden, and he said, oh, my wife got me a new chair and it's comfortable, but maybe it is too comfortable to write it. And I wanted to ask you if maybe those obstacles that were in front of you as you were writing made you want this even more.
I think yes. I think too comfortable may not always a great idea. I think suffering makes you resilient. Also, when you think life don't go so well, you stop and think about things. And in my case, that get to my burning desire to get out of the factory gave me the incentive to work hard. And I taught myself English.
How did that work out? How did you teach yourself? I mean, you mentioned Russian literature last night, and in the article mentioned the Carpenters.
The Carpenters, yes.
Those two different things.
I started teaching myself English when I was working in the factory.
Yeah.
It was difficult at that time. Today there are so many young people. There are lots of apps and there are TV programs in English. It was difficult at that time. So I listened to the radio and I became fascinated. And then somebody told me that learning English songs was a good way to learn the language.
Yeah.
So I started singing English songs.
What's your go-to Carpenter song?
Carpenter songs, oh, that's a sing, sing a song,
Okay.
sing along.
Not close to you. Not at all.
Close to you. Dum, dum,
That's the
dum.
one.
Yeah.
That's the one.
Yes. But carpenters, well, I'm sure you think of carpenters is quite enough, but for us,
Yeah.
carpenters represent the high culture from the West because the Carpenters was one of the first Western album that went on sale in China.
Really?
Lots of people of my generation love Carpenters. Yeah.
Do you think that affected your? Can I see some of the Carpenters in your book? Do you think that affected your writing in any way?
Oh, I don't think so.
No,
No,
no.
I don't think. I don't. No, but I would say if anything, they would just
Yeah.
sing songs and. Well, I said no impact, but some of the impact are probably more subtle than others.
Yeah. What impact has Russian literature had on you?
I loved the Russian show, and I just think it's just finest in the world because the canvas is so broad, but the details are just so vivid. And, yes, I love. And also, one book that had an impact in my life was Jane Eyre, Charlotte Bronte's masterpiece. Yes, I just kind of relate with her, her experience.
How so?
It's just quite unusual that, if you read many novels, the lead character is always beautiful, charming. Emma is beautiful, rich, and charming, and and Jane Eyre, she's plain looking.
Yeah.
And she struggled. I should say struggles. And also she's beneath her plain look, she's somebody full of longing and passion, and she's also a rebel. If she observes the social convention of Victorian England, she will never become.
Yeah.
She will remain forever as a governess. Yeah.
How did that inspire you to become a writer?
No, that inspires me to be different.
Nice.
Yes.
Nice. That's
Inspires.
sweet. That's sweet. And
So I just think, why can I break my rules? Yeah.
Your case in particular is interesting to students in NYU Shanghai, including me, myself, because you're fluent in English and you come from China and you have this option that you can write in Chinese or in English. And you've mentioned before that the reason you wrote Lotus in English was to pass the censorship because if you had written it. But I wanted to ask you a double question. First off, are there things that you write you feel more comfortable writing in Chinese and things you feel more comfortable writing in English? And how does the language you choose to write on affect what you're actually writing?
That's a great question. And I choose to write English because in this way, I do not have to worry about censorship. I can be free. I can objective, which is, I think, as somebody coming from journalist background, is extremely important. Yeah. But also that writing in English, English is not my mother tongue. Writing in another language frees me literally. Because it's not my native language, I can afford to be adventurous. I structure a sentence differently. I use different verbs. I borrow Chinese sayings. Yeah. So hopefully that makes my language more. My editor for Fall in Love with Lotus, and she's really felt passionately there's a freshness in the language. Yeah. Even though I make simple, the little grammatic mistakes. Mm-hmm. So that's the reason she found for her it's very attractive. And I sometimes does not always work. I borrow Chinese sayings, not always directly. For example, like a full horse carriage kind of put back, and sometimes doesn't always work. But I think it's really, really interesting to experiment with the language, using the structured sentence differently. It's been a very interesting adventure for me. And also the journey continues.
How so? Your next book you're writing is about the left behind children. Yes. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, left behind children refer to the children, they're children of migrant workers. Yeah. Migrant workers are the people who, they originally from the countryside and they left the village to work, to look for better employment, a better future. Yeah. So but they often work at the construction site, and their life is very transient, so they cannot bring their children with them.
Yeah.
And also there's a huge issue to send their children to local school, so they often leave their children with the grandparents. So that causes huge problems.
And you're focusing on one village.
One village.
And the characters, the people there.
Yeah, yeah.
That's something interesting in again, the New York Times piece, which I recommend everyone to read.
All right, thank you.
It mentions your novel, Socialist is, the memoir, Socialist is Great.
Yeah.
Socialism
The memoir is,
yes, the memoir. And it talks about how you you're not necessarily trying to influence anyone politically. You don't have like a political, but whatever political opinion you have or whatever political experience are demonstrated through your life experiences and your relationship with your boyfriends and everything like that. In that, the same way that you're writing about the left behind children, you pick one village as if the specific itself, the individual, can become universal.
Yes.
Is this a conscious decision or not?
I think, I don't know, probably both. And I just think the village I pick, it does not have the worst problem. Because that's not, some of the mountain village, difficult to get to there, the problem are worse. But I just think I want to give, in some ways, a typical example. I'm not looking for the worst cases.
Yeah.
I'm looking more typical example to show what are the issues, why those parents leave, and why the children, and what's their life like, and the hardship, the loneliness they endure, and the struggle the grandparents go through. The grandparents often illiterate. They don't know how to help the children. They sometimes forget to send their children to preschool. They don't realize there's such a thing as preschool. And so anyway, so that's, and through this kind of human stories, I think human stories are often more powerful than the numbers and dates now. There are 60 million people, probably just a number. But if the children...
60 million left behind children in China.
Yes, living the there are 61 million children living in China without both or one parents. So the number is, anyway, it's difficult, but anyway, just probably just number. But if I tell you a story how they are, the emotional pain they endured, they probably that will move people more. Hopefully, people will be more aware of the issue and do something about it.
Yeah. Do you ever write in Chinese?
I rarely. Sometimes, occasionally, friends ask me to write some articles. Otherwise, I write in English. Yes.
And how much have your story is such a peculiar one because it went into a memoir, and it's one of the first things you published was this memoir of this amazing story, and then you led on to work on novels, and now this looking outside into left behind children. Did you feel like this was something you had to get out of yourself first, your life story? Did it feel like an urgent project to you when you started working on it?
Which is
the memoir?
The memoir.
Yeah.
Yes. I wanted to write about my story, and I wanted to tell the story, and also I hope it's a classic case of telling the story of a big picture, a country in transition through personal experience, what I went through. In China, I don't know how much you know about China, but China for many people, myself included, was the most fascinating era. Deng Xiaoping introduced reform in the end of 1978, and then things began to change in the 80s.
Yeah.
So things began to happen. These changes took place in the 80s, and then in the literature field, books like Freudian, Nietzsche's books were introduced to China, introduced to China, to Chinese people for the first time, and they were selling like hot cakes, and there was very, just a little bit of window. People were China being had this self-imposed isolation for so long. Suddenly we saw that. Yes, it's just so exciting. People like me were so thirsty and wanted to know what's happening, and want to be in contact with the outside world, learning literature, art, and things. It was a very, very exciting time.
And Alex's last question is, what's the best writing advice you've ever received? Or what's an advice you would give yourself looking back to that girl in the factory?
I guess in the more recent, let's talk about more recent years, I think I had really great benefit from my professor, Blake Morrison, who taught me at Goldsmiths while I was working for my MA.
Yeah.
And he wrote a memoir about his father, where he used fictional technology to make the book more engaging, more literary, more readable. So I learned the same trick, which I applied in my memoir writing. By that time, I already finished the draft, but I went back. And
getting a mentor for you was important.
He was not my mentor. He was my professor. He was my tutor. Yeah.
And what's some writing advice you would give yourself then, looking back to the girl in the factory, if you had anything?
I don't have anything original, and I just think just
give us the biggest cliche of all time then.
Keep writing.
Nice.
And keep writing, rewriting.
Yeah.
And also, I think be bold and daring. And you know, literature is about go somewhere you haven't been to, and like you know, just recently I was asked to write a ghost story, and I did it, and I read some ghost story, and I said I can do it, so I did it.
Can't wait to read that.
So it will be taking the best speculative fiction from Asia, which include ghost story, horror story, and science fiction. Anything with this unrealistic element, and have never done that before. I said, why not give it a try?